Wasiq ji, a few weeks ago, we saw some very disturbing visuals coming out of Leicester and a few other places in the UK where Hindus and Hindu temples in particular were attacked. Now, for the benefit of our viewers, Wasiq ji, some of whom may not have followed the events the way they unfolded, you as someone who lives in the UK, could you please share with our viewers what exactly happened in Leicester a few weeks ago that led to the kind of violence that we saw?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Kamalji, for having me on. Thank you for the team at Chitti Media for organising this, and I really hope that your audience get a fruitful discussion from us and to cover some of the topics that perhaps you don't necessarily get to do in depth. Now, in terms of what really happened in Leicester, I think there is a caveat that I would like to make, and that's that I don't know all of the facts. And if I don't know all of the facts, there are other people who also don't know all of the facts. But there are some things that we can say for certain that happened. Now, one of the first things that I'd like to discuss is that there is a lot of talk of a Muslim man being apparently violently assaulted in May by a group of Hindu men. And this may or may not be true, but there are individuals that are pushing this narrative. Now, in my view, they are doing this to prove that what subsequently happened had its origins in community tensions between Muslims and Hindus. So when we saw all of those violent clashes between, or in fact, well, at least it seems to be orchestrated by groups of Islamist men against Hindus, then we need to look at the etiology of this, the origins of this. So that's one of the sparks that led to this. So what the narrative is that there was a lot of fuel there already and it just needed a spark. But after that May event, nothing happened. Nothing happened until India beat Pakistan in the cricket. And naturally, when we see these sorts of things happen, people in their droves come out to celebrate. People have laddu, they have jalebi, and even a bit of alcohol. Now, this is quite normal in the UK, especially after a sporting match. You only have to look at how football fans celebrate in their local in our language here in Britain is what we refer to as a public house, where people go to have a drink and have a good time and socialize with their friends. And they do this after winning a game. But of course, there are implications to this, and some will drink too much and they will misbehave. Now, this happens, and it's normal. It's not right, but it's a normal occurrence. So obviously, when scuffles take place and things can escalate and get out of hand, that's a shame, of course, but it does happen, and it did happen. And we saw videos of an individual who had drank too much and then was causing a lot of trouble when people were misbehaving. Now, this resulted in people nowadays taking their smartphones, recording it, and then sharing it in WhatsApp groups and some media and so on and so forth. And as a result of that, lots of misinformation is then distributed amongst networks of people, whether it's your network of aunties or Islamist networks or the so-called Hindutva networks. These things happen. And when misinformation is being propagated and not challenged, people tend to believe it. And as a result of this, what was being narrated by some of these people, these extremists, was that a Muslim man was being attacked by Hindus or Indians. It was Indians primarily at that time. And people tend to then believe this because no one's challenging it. And this becomes into a conspiracy theory. And there's a reason why people believe in conspiracy theories such as this or any others, is because there is an epistemic need that drives their consuming for unverified news. The reason why they do this is because they no longer believe in mainstream media reporting of it, or even people of authority giving it, because they don't trust them anymore. So they want to take control of an internal narrative And this was one of the reasons why all of these things were being shared so frequently, and lots of people were picking this narrative and believing it. Because at the end of the day, at that time, a lot of people weren't believing verified reports. So we heard of a Muslim man being stabbed. We also heard of an attempted kidnap of a Muslim girl, again by apparently Indians or Hindus. But yet, according to the police, none of this had actually been happening. However, what was happening was temples were being vandalized, Hindus were being harassed. This crucial point here is that balance here isn't required. I'm not here to give balance to something. I'm here to give objective facts. And we know that there is one objective fact here, is that the police confirmed that none of these things had happened. But remember, when it comes to conspiracy theories, it doesn't matter anymore, because the police had no standing with the community at the time in that sense, and so people just didn't care. Particularly, also even on social media, they didn't care that the police were saying these things didn't happen. They just wanted to ensure that whatever they were consuming was confirming a belief in them that they were being attacked. And when I talk about these people, I'm talking about the Islamists here. For them, they needed to believe that they were under attack, and there needed to be an enemy that was attacking them. And for them, the enemy was, of course, the Hindutva. But what is interesting about this is that what normally would have been just a normal ruckus, a ruckus meaning a fight between people from the subcontinent, whether it's Pakistan or India, this was now turning into a religious thing. Remember that what happened was a cricket match between Pakistan and India, not a cricket match between Muslims and Hindus. That is really important here. But it turned into a religious conflict. And in my view, it turned into a religious conflict because Islamists were coming out into their droves, both in Leicester and from outside of Leicester, to whip up this frenzy against the Hindutva threat that they now were presenting by everyone. And we saw this so clearly when the saffron flag was taken down by an individual who, in my view, could only have been an Islamist when he was there protesting with all the other Islamists outside of that Hindu temple. Nothing seemed to be done about that. Then also we saw in Smethwick, again, a bunch of Islamists went over there deliberately to target a Hindu temple because they had invited a speaker that the Islamists didn't disagree with. Now, it may be that the speaker was an extremist or not, or had said problematic things or not. That's irrelevant. The fact is that that speaker was allowed to come into the UK and to, speak. So it's not for anyone else to decide what a Hindu temple can do or not do, or if it is a matter of opposing it, then they can do it lawfully. But that's not what happened in Smethwick. What they did do was they targeted the Hindu temple, and we heard anti-Hindu sentiments both in Leicester and in Smethwick against Hindus. So this wasn't a case of we're rejecting this speaker in Smethwick. This was a case of we're actually rejecting Hindus in Smethwick for bringing in this speaker. So those are some important things that were happening. Also, the Islamist elements coming from outside of Leicester. So they were coming from London, coming from Birmingham. Now, London is obviously the capital. So we had Islamists coming from there all the way up to Leicester, over 100 miles away. And then Birmingham is in the West Midlands, and they were coming from there to Leicester. And now the only reason why they were coming is because they were well organized. They were well organized because there was a threat that they believed was against them, or even if they didn't believe that, they manufactured this threat in order to obviously feel like they could do something about it and to garner support. Now, this is really important when we really think about this, because when these Islamists came, the language that they were using was language of self-defense. They said that we're at threat. They said that the Hindutva are out here trying to get us. We heard some awful anti-Hindu sentiments being made against this, and they even said in front of the police that if these people try to do anything, we're going to lawfully resist them using proportional force. What they're trying to do is use the language of law to get away with actually carrying out acts of violence against Hindus. And so this is quite smart on their part, okay, because what they're trying to do is present themselves as being under attack. And if therefore we carry out violence, then that means it's lawful because we're under attack. And what are we meant to do? We're resisting. This is self-defense. And this is the sort of stuff that was happening. But it wasn't just this, because if I go back to your original question, is what really happened? Well, what also really happened is that the media played a role in this as well. There were some mainstream media outlets who were very much on this apparent Hindutva threat. I do put this as a caveat because there might be a threat, there might not be. I need to see the evidence, and so I can verify it myself. In fact, that's in my view, a Islamic principle is whenever someone brings a claim to you, then show me the proof, the evidence, and prove your claim. And so I haven't seen that yet. And when I'm presented with it, I will make my assessment of it. But at the time, there was such a focus on the so-called Hindutva threat that mainstream media seemed to ignore the threat or the act threat of Islamists. Now, as I said before, the police confirmed that none of this stuff against Muslims seemed to be happening. So the kidnapping, the stabbings, all that sort of stuff. But it was so obvious, blatantly, that there were threats being made against Hindus, actual anti-Hindu hatred, bigotry taking place when people are climbing onto temples and taking down the saffron flag, and then also rude gestures being made at another temple in Smethwick. Now, one mainstream media newspaper focused so much on Hindutva threat that in all of their coverage of the Leicester riots, they mentioned Hindutva 13 times, whereas they only mentioned Islamism once. And to me, I think that's quite bizarre when it's quite demonstrable what's taking place, yet at the same time, what was being presented in mainstream outlets was a completely different narrative. But it wasn't just that, it was also a whole article was devoted to explaining what Hindutva was and why it was a threat, yet nothing on Islamism again. And this just seems so odd when we can see blatantly what's happening, yet what we're reading is something completely different. So there's a mainstreaming there of Islamists and a mainstreaming there, or when I say mainstreaming of Islamists, what I mean is a legitimization of Islamists. And then there's also a mainstreaming of the so-called apparent Hindutva threat, which seems to be very bizarre. So, but it's not just that. Some of these media outlets were being, walked around towns, cities such as Leicester by some of the people who are being accused of stirring up hatred and violence. And again, this just seems so bizarre. Why are, in my view, the leftist media giving platforms to some of these individuals who have praised the Taliban or praised Al Qaeda, groups such as that, and then being used as trusted sources for what seems to have been taking place? There was also even accusations of some of these individuals being involved in some of this stuff. So when you ask me, Kamal, what really happened, in my view, a lot was happening, and it seems to be a lot happening against the Hindu community in Leicester and creating this Hindutva bogeyman so that more focus was on that rather than on the Islamists.
Absolutely, Wasiq ji. Thank you so much. I think that was a very comprehensive account of the various dimensions to something like this.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.